Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening. My name is Buffy Squires, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Musculoskeletal Australia, and I'm so glad that you could join us. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners of the land on which our organisation operates and where we come together to work in Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to the land, waterways and culture, and we pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. If you're new to our MSK Kids program, you might like to take a moment to check out our website. You'll find our primary school resources, also past webinar recordings, information on transitioning from paediatric to adult care, and a section on dealing with pain. We'll have another good asset to add to that section after tonight. You'll also find our contact details for our free MSK helpline, where you can chat with a nurse about any concerns that you may have. If your child is aged between 13 and 20, you may also like to check out our online chat group Teen Talk. It's run through Discord, which if you have teenagers, they're likely on already. It's a great place for teens to come together and chat with others who get it, and you can find more information on our website. I'd also like to encourage you to follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages. This is where you'll be able to keep up to date on upcoming events. So our presenter for this evening is Dr. Joshua Pate. Josh is a senior lecturer in physiotherapy at UTS, and he's also the author of Zoe and Zach's Pain Hacks, a new range of books aimed at helping children understand chronic pain. Josh is a passionate pain scientist and educator. His goal is to make pain science education accessible to everyone and reduce the overall burden of chronic pain. So thank you, Josh. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Buffy, and thank you everyone for joining, and or if you're watching this recording, hi. So I'm really excited about tonight, about what we can share and some kind of practical tips for people who are accessing this tonight. So I just wanted to point out, there was a paper just a couple of weeks ago for those with families who are facing juvenile idiopathic arthritis. This review was just published a couple of weeks ago. It covers a whole range of different topics. There is so much research being done, and I guess that's one key message from tonight, is to just keep an eye out for what is coming and to talk with your health professionals about those things. This paper in particular has some nice summaries and links to more reading, lots of different references. It explores the relationship between arthritis and COVID, and where the research is up to in that space. But I particularly wanted to highlight this because all reviews about these kind of conditions are similar in that pain is often the initial complaint, and here it is. And pain is also a target for treatment and kind of the key target. And so what we're going to be talking about tonight is some of the educational foundation behind different treatments, but it's all going to be focused around the science of pain because it's a very complex topic. So I'm going to share 5 facts with you now, and I hope it's hard because you don't have your microphones on, but I think they will make you say, wow, or something like that. So here's fact number 1. Kids challenged by chronic pain miss 22% of school. I'm assuming you just said, wow. And not kind of like in a way of surprise, right? Like that's like a day, a week, or one whole year of high school or primary school. It's a lot of missed kind of productivity, but it's not just that. It's so many more things that result from missing out on participating in school. Fact number 2, approximately 1 to 2 kids per classroom are challenged by chronic pain. The prevalence is kind of on par almost with in adults. It's 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 3 over 65 years old. And that number is huge. Like that is a lot of people. And when I grew up, I didn't have chronic pain, and going through school, I didn't know of anyone. And for this to be true means that pain is often quite invisible, and maybe they were the kids who were just missing class, or they were seen to be naughty, or they didn't like sport, or whatever it was. But there's probably a lot going under the surface, and we'll talk about stigma soon. The latest statistic for JIA as a particular condition, because we're talking to MSK Australia, it's about a few in 1,000 kids are diagnosed with JIA, and pain, as I said, is one of the most common complaints in that regard. Now, this is where if there were policy people in the room or the government, this is what they would care about. And I know I'm probably not speaking to people who want to hear about this, but 5 years ago now was the last check on how much chronic pain's costing. And this number, like $1 billion, is so big. That is just an enormous number to try and comprehend. And $139 billion is how much chronic pain costs each year in Australia. And we're a pretty small country. This is bigger than so many other conditions combined. And so I guess I'm just highlighting the need for us to be addressing it and the importance of you being here tonight to think about this together. Fact number 4, kids challenged by chronic pain have poorer outcomes in adulthood. And this is established, there's some papers there along the bottom, but the list of outcomes is enormous. It's not just like the likelihood of opioids or premature death, or there's so many big ones, but it's also things like the likelihood of missed days at work and their kids having chronic pain and like social interactions and academic outcomes, and there's so many things, and it's just horrible. And I don't think there's much I can say through a tiny little screen on your Wednesday night here to truly validate how terrible this is. But I'm hoping that these facts start painting a little bit of a picture that it's not just horrible now, it's also down the track that pain causes spirals of fear and avoidance and disability and all sorts of challenges that can arise if the right supports aren't there and doing things according to the latest evidence. Fact number 5 is the one where we start heading in a more positive direction. There is some pretty good, compelling evidence now, particularly in adults, but a lot of my research is showing similar things in kids, that learning about pain can help. And you probably hear this and you think that's a bit weird, right? But like there's so many studies. I was on ABC Radio last week and we're talking about this study, and it's actually in the second book of the series, Zoe and Zach's Pain Hacks, which I'll talk about soon. But there was this study where participants came in and they put a cold metal rod, really cold, on people's wrists, and it was minus 20 degrees. So, and they were rating how much pain did you feel? And there was some lights on in the room. And when there was a blue light on, they felt less pain than when there was a red light on. And in the book, we talk about Zoe Zoppens goes on this adventure. And in the second book, she realizes that like if a little light can change the volume of pain, there's so many other things that can do that. And it kind of opens up these conversation starters to have. And I guess when we say learning about pain can help, it's things like that. It's building confidence that there are so many options. It's not just, oh, if this medication doesn't work, my life is done and I should give up. Like there are so many ways we can focus on little improvements, and the long-term changes are seemingly the better targets than that short-term relief, because the short-term relief almost drives a desire for more short-term relief. And it's a hard balance. And obviously we need to be talking with your trusted health professionals, but the idea that there's a whole bunch of evidence now that learning is helpful, and there's about 8 key outcomes, I think, for adults, and we've got it down to 5 for kids, of things that we think are really, really useful to learn from. And so we're going to talk about those as our practical tips tonight. A few key things. So for kids who don't have a particular diagnosis like JIA, a lot of kids, when they get to about the age of 10, start developing weird things that get investigated, and then they get told, oh, it's all in your head or something like that. And it's like this 2-year process of getting lots of scans. They might start with tummy pain or back pain or neck pain or something, and everything's clear and they get told, look, you're fine, but the kid's still got pain. And that kind of picture typically emerges like late primary school or early high school, so around the onset of puberty. And a lot of stigma happens in schools, and there's some researchers doing some great work trying to unravel this, because in a school system, there's so many factors at play, and there's not often a health professional there or someone advocating necessarily for the kid. And so this can be really challenging, and often that's why it goes unnoticed or undertreated. This is some of the research I've been involved in this area, and I'm really excited to share some of it tonight. So if you want to read more, there's so many papers and things we can share. Just a quick example of something recent. One of my PhD students, we're going into schools and providing like a framework of education to teachers, and to see if we can take some of the load off by giving teachers a better vocabulary to validate and explore some of these influences with kids. And this is this is from one of the studies driving that study was teachers were saying things like this. At the moment with pain, we just go with our gut instinct. So if we could have something that gave us that knowledge and that knowledge was consistent, so everyone dealt with it in a similar way. Because what they see in a classroom is one kid does this and they need to time out, and the next one needs a heat pack, and the next one goes home, and there's all these different strategies going on, but the evidence is not saying that you should necessarily do one thing or the other. And so that kind of makes teachers say things like, well, I'm not a doctor. And so that green quote there says, there should be a consistent approach for teachers and students. And so I think the idea of having teacher well-being linked with student well-being would be helpful. And so we've got this idea in our research team at the moment that a common vocabulary could be really helpful. And what we're finding is having books like a resource that kids can confidently read and understand, rather than medical experts saying, hey, you got central sensitization, or you need to look at this arthritic webpage and understand this, or whatever it is. Having a language where the common language is kid-friendly, I think is really, really empowering. And this is not like, I think this is particularly important because it's not just like grazing your knee and then you need to talk about putting on a Band-Aid or don't worry about it, your skin will heal anyway, whatever. Like it's a much more complex condition, and the implications kind of go on for weeks and months and potentially years. So when I talk about this education, it's often in the literature called pain science education. And the way I think of it is it's like a foundational structure that guides what we call biopsychosocial healthcare. Now, that's a big jargony kind of word. But if we break it down, the bio is all the biomedical stuff, all those tests and things you've had done, what's actually happening in the cells of your body. Psycho, that middle part, the psychological factors that contribute to pain, there are so many of them. And a lot of people, when they first hear this, think that researchers or experts are saying that pain is in someone's head, and that's not true. What happens at the spinal cord and in the brain is so incredibly complex, and psychological factors are a big part of that. And so, for instance, there was a recent study showing how much of the parts of the brain that are lighting up when someone feels pain overlap with the parts of their brain that when they feel depressed or sad or anxious, or there's all these other states that are really, really similar. And it makes a lot of biological sense because we're trying to keep our body safe when we feel these feelings, whether it be pain or whether it be sadness. And so for some people, they will feel pain as their main symptom, and other people, they might feel something else, but the underlying condition could be the same. And the last bit is often neglected, and that's social. The social aspects of pain are massively undervalued. In terms of, when I say valued, I mean underappreciated. There was a study showing that postcodes influence pain outcomes. Like, it's just the access to care, and there's so many parts to this. But if you are not on the same page, so, for parents, if you're not on the same page as the other caregiver in the house, or as the siblings or the grandparents or the coach or the teacher, or everyone kind of needs to be on the same page, I think, for us to get optimal outcomes. And so that's a really, really big challenge that researchers and clinicians are trying to start tackling, but it's early days. And yeah, I guess it's like almost like we need to apologize that we're not doing that well yet, but we will get better at it, I think, as a kind of health collective. One really big finding from my PhD, this was back, we published this in 2019, was a paper where we interviewed kids, and we realized the importance of resources being developmentally appropriate. So when a kid is 5, like my daughter would love reading certain things, but other ideas would be way too complicated. And likewise, if you showed that same resource to a teenager, they'd be like, oh, that's boring. And so we need to really clearly make sure not just the language or the interest level or the style are developmentally kind of sound and appropriate, but we want to make sure the learning that happens is also happening at appropriate levels. So we need educational experts involved. We've done that. And that last line, the concept of pain inventory, is a questionnaire that we developed during my PhD. A big team of experts from around the world came together, and it's these 14 sentences about pain and how it works and why you feel it. And the idea is that it enables targeted education. And so if people answer those questions in certain ways, a clinician can reach for different books from the series, or different videos online, or different resources from the MSK website, lots of different places where there's great information, and try and understand where you're at, rather than having someone lecture you, not like this, but like often in some hospitals and things, they give you 2 hours of a big lot of education, and you're kind of like, okay, what does that mean for me? And it's really hard. And so I think we need to start targeting education. All right. Oh, I'll go back on. Sorry, I just skipped a slide there. This is Zoe and Zach's Pain Hacks. And so there's 5 books in the series. And it's a very exciting time for me at the moment. These books have just come out. We're starting to go into schools, and I'm doing author visits, and lots of cool things are kind of in the works at the moment. And I think at the least, this quote is probably true. The ultimate set of conversation starters, like at least it's getting people thinking about helpful, tricky topics. And at the end of each book, there's like tricky conversation starters where if you didn't have that prompt, it's quite hard to raise some conversations with kids, or for kids to talk about with their parents. And what can happen in this kind of late primary age, everyone's asking the kid, what's going on? What's going on? And they say, I don't know. And that's treated like it almost gets dismissed. And I think that's really hard. And because the child doesn't yet have the vocabulary to explain it, doesn't mean technically they don't know. It's just that they can't explain it yet. And so these books and the questions we've designed are trying to guide some of those really helpful conversations that are beneficial, but very difficult to have if you're just having your best shot at bedtime, for instance. So we'll keep going. Oh, thanks. I can see some chat questions are already coming through in the Q&A. That's great. Please, yeah, keep them coming. That's fine. We'll get to them as we go. All right. So cognitive development is, I guess it's kind of your brain developing and your ability to think over time. And that happens alongside affective development, your emotions. A lot of my research has been in 8 to 12-year-olds. So old enough, it says on the slide, old enough to fill out a questionnaire and be reliable, but young enough that they're not able to think abstractly. So if you said a phrase like, oh, this headache feels like elephants dancing in my head. That was a paper from a long time ago. Someone under about the age of 12 would be like, what are you talking about? There's no elephants in my head. Whereas from teenage years, that makes perfect sense that that's metaphorical, and that's a really common like simile or a metaphor that's used to explain the experience. And so we need to be really careful, not just in the words that we use, but the metaphors that underlie those words. And so if you say something like, you'll be fine, or you'll be okay, and the person won't actually be okay, particularly a child, you want to be really careful, because we want to maintain trust and make sure that we're being accurate as we talk. Now, what's really exciting about the kids' books, as we did studies and over the last 5 years or so developing these books, we've found that the younger kids, even under 8, 6 and 7-year-olds, are quite like kind of reading up, I suppose. So it instills curiosity, that box on the left. What do you think's happening in this picture? Those kind of ideas, rather than diving into the nitty-gritty necessarily. But for the older kids, and there's some studies in the US at the moment where they're using these books with teenagers and saying, hey, for an 8-year-old, do you think they would understand it? And I think that's really empowering and appropriate for a teenager, and particularly like 16 to 18-year-olds. Their cognitive developmental stage is, we are the future leaders of Earth. And so you can tap into that. And so what we're finding is having a younger resource is actually a helpful starting point with some of these conversation starters. Now, all of this, you might be hearing all this and going, yeah, but I don't have the books yet, or I haven't watched many of these videos, or whatever it is. And I think maybe just reflect upon all the pieces of paper that you've been given in all those appointments, and how helpful are they if they're targeted only at one of the people mentioned earlier, like the parents, the coaches, the teachers, the siblings, the brother, whoever it is, let alone the kid. And I think that's where I want to start helping and maybe directing some of our research, is to try and build that evidence base so that it's really clear, like all these great findings we're finding out in science over the last couple of decades aren't just going completely unnoticed, which is often the case. And that's really frustrating for me as a researcher. So why did we make it a series? Now, I said there was 5 kind of learning outcomes we'll talk about soon. What's really cool about it, or kids love series, that's one thing, but having bite-sized resources, something that only takes 5 or 10 minutes to chat about, is a much more helpful way of kind of introducing a tricky topic. It's much more interactive to do that. And a clinician could give one book to you, or you could share this with one family member at a time. And one thing that was really cool for me was that we got to create a whole world. And so if you think about your favorite cartoon show, whatever it is, there's this world and you know the character before the episode starts or before the book starts. You already know a little bit about them. And so in the book, we get to know Zoe Zoppens and her cousin Zach, and you get to see Zach succeeding and getting back to school. And you then see Zoe start on an action plan. And throughout the books, you learn about her family members and what she likes. And there's all like silly things about finding dogs in the background and stuff like that. And I think having a series is better than separate chapters. But anyway, that was just a little side thing I wanted to share because of this point. There's lots of sneaky learning going on. Each book has a different rhyming pattern. The comic illustrations are just so cool. I can't take any credit for them. It's just unbelievable. It keeps the story moving. The characters are very relatable. There's diary entries at the start of each book to show and validate to kids that what they're feeling and what they're writing down is okay, and they're allowed to voice what they're feeling. And then at the end of each book, there's interactive activities, and it takes you to a free online platform. This is what the online portal looks like. You scan a QR code, it takes you to Zoe and Zach's painhacks.com, and each book has a separate page. There's lots of printable stuff. There's sections for parents and questions you can talk about, teachers like lesson plans, for clinicians, all the scientific research underpinning each book. And this is all free. There's heaps of videos on there, and there's more and more things being uploaded, and it's growing all the time. So please do check that out. You're welcome to do that even right now if you want. I'm really excited about that. And I think the reason I'm excited is because there's so much for us to be learning. And these are some of the things that I really wish I learned as someone who didn't even have chronic pain growing up. I wish I learned it because I could be a better brother, a better cousin, a better son, all these the people around me who are challenged by chronic pain. I think it's helpful information at the very, very least. And this research from the past 3 decades is not specific to kids or specific to a condition, but it's useful as a really clear starting point. And so we'll talk about them all in just a sec. So in 2021, Hayley Leake, you might recognize her name. She won Survivor a few years ago. One of my colleagues, she's in South Australia. She did this study where they looked at patients who have recovered and they're doing really, really well with their chronic pain. They said, what did you learn that really helped? And these were the 3 main messages. Pain doesn't necessarily mean my body's damaged. My thoughts, emotions, and experiences affect my pain, and I can retrain my overprotective pain system. And now at a similar time, so we started developing the books already by this point, there was this other study where they went back and forward with consumers and with experts and went round and round and came up with these learning statements. And I've color-coded them to show that there's some overlap. But some of these ideas are really, really common and they kind of relate. And what's exciting for us is in the pediatric world, we've been able to map what we've found in children's research onto some of these findings from adults. So for instance, if we look at the red one there, the way you would say this one for kids would be, so many things can turn the volume of my pain up or down. And that's everyone uses iPads and whatever all the time, pressing volume buttons on the TV. Whereas for adults, a more abstract description might be something like, when it comes to pain, everything matters. And an adult might be able to interpret that. But for a kid, they need to know the nitty gritty of that. Does that make sense? The difference between concrete and abstract thinking? And so if we're going to talk about this stuff in a public setting, like a webinar or on TV or whatever it is, I think we should be using the lowest common denominator language. We should use the language that everyone can understand. And this is what happens in mathematics and all the other areas at school. We're using the language that the kids, what's the current understanding? A kid can do addition and then we'll learn subtraction. We're not going to start talking about subtraction until we understand that first thing. And the same sort of thing is going to happen here. We don't need everyone to become a neuroscientist, but there are some really helpful messages that we want to start with. My little bias along the way here is what we saw with the Slip, Slop, Slap campaign in the 1980s with skin cancer prevention. I want to do the same with chronic pain prevention. And I think there's some really key ideas here worth testing in big research studies, but it's early days and it's an exciting time, but we don't know what the findings will be yet. Let me show a video of, this is a kid just after he read one of the books, him talking about how pain works.
If you're about to get hurt, your senses send electrical messages to your brain, up to your brain, and your brain says, should I make pain or not? If it does not, it's normally because they don't think there's a great possibility of you getting hurt. But if they do, then it's like, it's a great possibility. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
So I showed this video, this clip at the Australian Pain Society conference. I was speaking there a couple of weeks ago in Canberra, and one of the big responses from adult clinicians in the room, they said, I think I don't give kids enough credit for how much they can understand. And that was just a nice little moment of us. We should empower our kids. All right, so how are we going for time? We're doing well. We're going to dive into the learnings now, and then I want to hear the Q&A questions. So please jump in. So there's 5 messages. The number 1, feeling pain doesn't necessarily mean my body is damaged. And this is a tricky one. In the first book in the series, Zoe goes and visits her uncle Ozzy in a building site, and he has a nail go through his boot and has this really challenging pain experience. And we explore this idea, and it's quite striking and surprising in the book. So the book's called Zoe's Oppens Nails It, and you can get these books in your school library or your library around. You just request it, and they'll send it over eventually. It can take a couple of weeks at the moment, but we're getting there. And the reason we did this as the first book is that many people in the research just recently, kids with challenged by chronic pain, they say they look back on their journey once they're managing well, and they say there was often a turning point. And commonly that relates to learning something. And I think that's really nice. If we can give kids 5 moments where they learn something in a series of appointments, maybe over a 6-week period or something like that, often that could be the driver to get to try something different or to start tackling all those different biopsychosocial influences that are turning the volume up and down on their pain. It's a very surprising story. It starts lots of conversations. And one thing that I think is really, really helpful is there's a misconception that commonly comes up with kids' pain when they have all these scans done, or they say, this is in remission, you shouldn't have any symptoms now, but they do have pain. Kids start feeling, oh, everyone thinks it's all in my head. Everyone thinks I'm faking it. Something like that comes up, particularly in their early teens. And this book tackles that idea head on in those questions at the end. And I think that's really empowering for kids. Number 2, so many things turn the volume of my pain up or down. I mentioned this book before. This is Zoe going to visit her grandma, who's a superstar scientist in a lab. And you hear that story about the red and the blue lights. What a lot of people, when you go and see a health professional now, the guideline-based care is to talk about biopsychosocial influences. And with the familiar character of Zoe, this was kind of the starting point. And I guess for you, if you're sitting there going, oh, what have I learned so far in this talk? Have a think about some of these ideas and do they apply to you? Like if you accidentally stubbed your toe today, there's so many things that can turn the volume of pain up or down. Like if you looked at it or didn't look at it, that would change the volume. Or if you've had back pain for 30 years, so many things can change the volume of pain. If you've done that same task hundreds of times and it's hurt, is it going to hurt the next time? Well, the evidence says it's more likely to happen. And why is that? And there's some great research out there, like even from vaccine pain in kids, we can reframe memories and see less pain at subsequent vaccinations. And there's so many things going on here. It's a really, really exciting key message, I think, to think about. The third one brings in other symptoms other than pain, things like feeling nauseous or fatigue or sadness or worry. These are all protectors. And we introduce this word to empower kids to say, the biological underpinnings for pain are similar with all these other feelings. They're invisible protectors. And the kids in this story, the kids, it's kind of like they put on virtual reality goggles and they go inside the human brain and they get to see the spinal cord sending all these messages up and down. And they see some of the complexity and have some awe about how amazing and adaptable and resilient our bodies are. A lot of people think that our spines are fragile or these crazy ideas that have no justification in the evidence, when our bodies are really strong and our bodies can adapt. And so seeing a health professional who can support you and show you and check that you are safe to move is a really important step. And so this message, this book is a starting point often used in schools at the moment now, which is really exciting. The fourth book, I Can Retrain My Body and Brain. This key message is coming out. You probably heard maybe the word neuroplasticity or something like that before. This word neuroplasticity came out in stroke research, where people who had a stroke, part of their brain is no longer functioning. It's completely bled. It's not working anymore. And you hear of these people who learn to walk again, or they learn to talk again, all these different skills. And what happens is a different part of their brain develops the ability to do that skill. It kind of takes over. It's plastic, it's moldable is what that means. And so what we see in chronic pain, lots of changes are happening from a cellular level, genetically, changes happening in the spinal cord, changes happening in the nerves, changes happening in the brain, in your muscles, everywhere. All these changes are happening all the time. And actually, there are changes happening even if you didn't have chronic pain. But with chronic pain, our protective system, the volume gets turned up at all these different levels. And so what's kind of this idea, and it rhymes, I guess, is retraining the nervous system to show this is safe. For instance, like going to school is safe for your body, or walking is safe, or whatever it is. And this is true at so many different levels, from in ICU when someone's close to dying, right through to when they're elite athletes. Retraining our brains is possible. We don't get to 18 years old and our brain stays the same. I saw a patient not that long ago now. He was 87 and he got told when he was 30 to never run because he's got arthritis in his knees and it's going to break and he's fragile, and all these kind of horrible messages to hear that aren't scientifically true, by the way. And for 57 years, he never ran. And in a 6-week program with a group, we got this guy, like we looked through his scans, we checked to make sure he was safe. And the osteoarthritis wasn't flaring up. We gradually built up his function. And he was running faster than 7 of the 10 people in the group by the end of that 6 weeks. It was a very exciting thing. And I guess, like, for him, he would say the education was the thing that changed everything. And likewise, what we see in kids' pain clinics, often it's that moment where you go, change is possible. And so the way that change is possible comes up in this book is Zoe is hanging out with a cousin. They're pretending, dressing up in the backyard. And Zach's come over and he's had back pain, but now he's getting back to school and Zoe's kind of just really curious. And so this raises the idea of what meaningful activities are you missing out on that you want to get back to? And so some of the conversations there can be quite challenging, but really, really exciting in the long term. And finally, what comes together, we fast forward and Zoe's 7 weeks into her own action-packed action plan. And Zoe Zoppens now is getting back to school, and some of the things that she was missing out on, like soccer training and doing a speech at school where her tummy pain would flare up, it's now becoming less of a challenge. She still feel the pain, but it's not bothering her. And you're seeing this shift in perspective happen. And then Zoe turns to the camera, the reader, and says, like, if Zach could do it and I could do it, like, go and chat to someone. Let's see what's possible. And I guess it's that renewed sense, like there's a lot of evidence showing that a sense of hope has a big prediction of whether someone has good outcomes or not. And so maybe this talk, nothing more than hope comes out of it. And that's fine. A lot of people say, oh, you don't take in more than 10% of what you hear. So that's why I talk fast. No, I'm just joking. No, I think it's really, really important to consider the latest science. And I can almost guarantee that in the next 10 years, there'll be so many more great findings that we can use to try and help people who are challenged by chronic pain. And I'd like to think maybe in 10 years' time, I'll come back and share some of those things. That'd be really exciting. And what's cool about Zoe's action plan, I think she has 53 or something, a whole bunch of different strategies. And when you hear that number, you might think, gee, okay, I'm trying a heat pack, or I'm doing this or that, or what, I'll take these medicines or do that. Maybe you get to 10 strategies. And when you see Zoe have 50 strategies, it's kind of like, wow, I need to start thinking about, there are so many things within my ability that I could change to change my situation. So it changes the perspective, rather than it being about who can I get to fix me, or put this knife in me and surgically do this, or give me these tablets or this needle or whatever it is. They're all passive strategies, and they don't typically have very good long-term outcomes for a lot of people. They do for some, but not for many. Whereas active strategies have lots of evidence, and the evidence is growing for those things. And so it raises the idea of the importance here, this bottom part. Parents, siblings, health professionals, teachers, coaches, everyone around a child needs to be involved. And that is a huge emphasis. And I think the reason that's such a big emphasis is because it's never been emphasized in these publicly available resources before. Like there was a study showing in Pixar movies and in what's available on Disney and Netflix and stuff, when you think about kids' movies representing pain, it's always in the context of comedy, and they get dismissed, and people get treated poorly. And like, there's all these nice data showing some of these horrible things that are going on, but it's not intentional. It's not like people are doing that, like they're representing pain in a negative way for certain reasons. It's just, they're not thinking about health outcomes, right? And so more and more, what we're going to see is some of these nice resources. Like I did a video for TED Ed a few years ago, and that's had millions of views. And so there's stuff out there now where kids can learn in a way that's scientifically accurate. And it's not dismissing them, and it's not creating more stigma. And I'm really excited about that. And I want to get better at that. And I think it's not just me. Like, there are so many people in Australia and around the world working on this educational stuff. I want to share what it might look like. And this, maybe we're working on it now, but it might take years to get to the final outcome. Imagine if learning about pain was part of the next generation school curriculum. This is something we're looking at in several countries. It's at different stages, in different states. It's just a big challenge to tackle. So not only do we want to update the curriculum so that it's in line with the best evidence, but because the evidence is helpful for people's health, we also want to include that in the curriculum. And so there's some challenges there, because teachers are focused on learning outcomes, and health professionals are focused on health outcomes, and parents are kind of trying to navigate both. And there's lots of challenges there. So yeah, if you have ideas, I would love to chat more. Please do reach out an email, or you can ask in the chat now. So to wrap up, this is what it could look like, by the way. So for adults, all these different factors influencing pain, often people see diagrams like this. I think someone made a t-shirt of that. But on the right, you can see this is in Zoe Zoppen's in the book, where she learns about all these different things that are changing in her brain, and things that she can do about those things. Here's some of the research in kids' pain education. Look at all those dates. They're all within the last 5 years, almost exclusively, except for one study on tonsillectomy. No research has been done. Well, there's a couple of studies we haven't quite published yet on the kids' books, but there's plenty more coming. But it is just such early days. And that's the picture I want to leave you with, is that we don't know that much yet, but the little bit we do know, I think, is already very empowering, and I want to get the word out about it. So if you want to share this or share some of the research we've been doing, I'd be very grateful, because that helps achieve our kind of mission and the goal in my career. I want to give a shout out to Beck Fechner. One of my PhD students is brilliant. We've been looking at teachers and some of the stigma in schools here. She's then interviewed them, and we're running this study, as I mentioned at the start, about seeing how teachers go when they are given some of this education to pass on. The publisher of the kids' books set up these webinars. If you want to learn more about the kids' books, you can check those out on YouTube or Vimeo. They're everywhere online. The books can be ordered there's 5 different distributors, I think, around the world now. So if you Google Zoe and Zach's Pain Hacks, that will come up. If you want an author visit at your school, you can contact me, email, and we can start that, or through the publisher as well. Love to chat if you're a school teacher, principal, etc. We're recruiting for different studies at the moment. But you don't have to do that. We could just have a visit. That'd be fine. A few quotes I heard recently, I just thought I'd share. A clinician said, I use these books with a 12-year-old. They had CRPS. It's a really complex condition in her hand. She loved it. It helped give some structure to the sessions. So there were 6 sessions, and they did the 5 books as the 5 bits of homework each week. Here's what a kid said, a little 6-year-old. She said, I give a gold medal to the 3rd book, silver to the 5th, and a bronze to the 2nd. I just love the one at school, the red book, because our brains are amazing. And that's that curiosity and awe coming out in a younger kid. A parent emailed me the other day, and she said, we've read the books a number of times and they ignited something in him, and the son was in hospital. He immediately started writing things down, was excited. I'm convinced of the books are what helped him in hospital. It's incredible. And then just this was 2 days ago, a parent said they overheard their son talking to a friend. You'll like these books because because Uncle Ozzy's like your dad. Has your dad ever had a nail in his boot? And it was like this conversation I heard about. Like secondhand, I heard about, because the dad was a builder. It was like, and that's that thing of, rather than an information sheet, we need relatable stories that people can pass on. Someone's built a little toy of Zoe Zoppen's. I thought that was cute. But I want to say a big thank you. The publishing team is enormous. All the research experts that I work with, the books went through 26 expert reviewers over the 5-year period. So many families have been involved in all these different studies and are ongoingly involved. the schools who are getting involved at the moment. My family has had to put up with me doing webinars and things at night and stuff like that. Very, very supportive people around me, and I'm so grateful. And so thank you for your time tonight. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and to have further chat. So there's my contact details. You can reach out on social media or via email. If you just Google my name, it'll come up. Thank you, Buffy. I hope I've stayed pretty close to time.
I think you were about spot on, Josh. I don't quite know how you managed that, but well done. Josh, that was amazing. Thank you. There's so much information in there, and I'm sure all our families will have got a lot out of that and probably need to rewatch it at least another couple of times to get through everything that you've mentioned. But that's amazing. Thank you.
That's great. I should just say I did maybe cover things briefly, but that is to emphasize there is so much to cover. And for a lot of people hearing this, it's like, I've never heard any of this. Yes. And I think that's really exciting, is that there is so much to learn. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think exciting for our families and our young people listening is that there's so much research around this at the moment and so much is changing. So, it's never a good time to be in pain, but if there can be a good time, things are going to improve and there's going to be more options, I think, for people, which is great. So we've got a few questions that have come through, so we might just get going on some questions. Please, everyone watching, please go ahead and pop your questions down in the Q&A box below. Can we start with, you mentioned about when children or young people have a past experience of pain. So whether that's a medical procedure or whether it's they've traveled on a bus for a long period of time and their back was very sore. So next time, how do you go about sort of making sure that those past experiences aren't carried on to new experiences? Yeah, really good question. It's so individualized. There was a study recently where everyone had this really hot thing put on their wrist and they rated how much pain they felt from 0 to 100. And before I read it, and I read it a little while ago, I was kind of thinking, the answers will be maybe like a 70 out of 100, like around that number or something. But what they found, they asked so many people, and some people felt 0 out of 100 pain. Some people felt 100 out of 100 pain. And it's the same stimulus. So the exact same amount of tissue damage is happening, and people are feeling all sorts of different experiences and feelings related to that. And I mention that because it's so individualized. One kid who has JIA and it looks like this, the next appointment, the doctor's seeing, on paper, it looks very, very similar, but the challenges are completely different. And I want to mention that to just validate that the pain is still real, no matter what the experiences are behind it. And like, so for someone, if they've sat on a bus for a long time and it's hurt, what about that? Why did that happen? And someone like a physiotherapist can explore, like do a physical exam and look through when does fear start? Why would you avoid sitting? How long do you think it's safe to sit? There's lots of questions that can factor in here. But there's research on expectations, on memories, on if the parent is present, if the clinician gets down on eye level, how much empathy is shown, whether you're looking at it, like there's so many things here. And I think so for every experience, there's at least 10, 20 kind of variables at play. And so I guess the answer is it's different for everyone. And so you should chat to your health professional or get a second opinion if you need to explore that further. Is that okay? I don't know if I fully answered it. I guess I was just thinking as you said that too, you said about, was it Zoe having 53 tools in her toolbox? I guess, would that be an approach, having tools in your toolbox so that when you are coming into a situation that you have experienced pain in the past or feel that might be painful for you, you've got those tools ready? That's right. And so Zoe's modeled on like a conglomeration of a whole bunch of patients who are doing well. Like there's kids who we see and they feel tummy pain. Like they used to feel butterflies when they were going to do a speech at school, but now it's turned into, that's their pain coming when that happens. And so like they see this weird merging of old symptoms now becoming painful symptoms. And so that particular example, for instance, for Zoe, like breathing strategies and unhelpful thought management, and there's a bunch of things there that she does that really help her. But that's not to say that that's going to help everyone. And so I think what we want to do is, until we have really firm evidence on these are the 53 strategies that are perfect, I think health professionals should be presenting here. There's lots of different active strategies you can try, and it's going to be a little bit of trial and error. But for you, these are probably the ones that are going to be most beneficial, like best bang for your buck in terms of time, particularly. And think none of them are expensive. Like, I don't think it should ever be like spinal cord stimulators or things like that. Like, we don't need to go to that extreme. But in terms of time and effort, it's some of these strategies are very difficult. So a lot of hard work.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, a couple more questions we've got here. Somebody asked early on, is the stigma in schools reference Claire Wakefield?
I think her name's Emily. Oh, I'm sorry if she's here. She's in the US. I can look that up.
Okay.
I met her in 2019, but I can't remember her first name. But she's published a lot, and Emily, it's either Emily or Claire. Does ring a bell now that you say whoever said that. I think it's Emily though.
Okay, all right. And what age are the resource books targeted to?
So this book series is for 6 to 12, or 6 to 10 is probably the sweet spot. I hear from parents who are reading with their 11-year-olds, and it's kind of that, like, some of them are kind of too cool by that age. Like, oh, I'm already reading Harry Potter or whatever. And I think it's still very accessible though. And so what they say is, oh, I'm too cool for this. Like, I don't, and then they're still reading it and wanting to, so maybe they're not looking at the pictures as much, whereas a 6-year-old would really be wanting to understand the comics, and the adult might be reading the words. So I think it's like kind of 6 to 10, but then maybe plus or minus 2, a little bit beyond those ranges. Yeah.
Now, Josh, I know you mentioned the website where people can go, and a lot of those resources are available free and can be downloaded. If somebody wanted to speak with their school about getting the books through their library, how would they best go about doing that?
Yeah, this is an interesting challenge. So I am a health professional background. I'm a researcher. I am not a publisher or a distributor of books. And so it's been a big learning curve seeing how all this works and watching the publisher navigate this. But yeah, basically, like, it's in all the state libraries and national libraries, and all of, like, a lot of local libraries are starting to get it.
Right.
And the way that it gets into a school library is the librarian just orders it, and it's in those distributors for schools. So basically, if the teacher is aware, they'll chat to the librarian. That the most common path I've seen, and it's only been a couple of months, so I'm open to suggestions, but basically, normally a teacher says, hey, I've got someone, we really want to get these books. The librarian then puts in the order. And these days, it's not like you have to wait till book week to do orders. It's like online and all of that. So most schools have a particular book. It's kind of like the equivalent of a bookshop, like a distributor that they can contact. But yeah, also, like, equally, you can go direct through like your local library, or through the publisher. Neugroup.com is the publisher.
Great. Okay, fabulous. Just a question here about returning to school after a long period off with chronic pain. Do you recommend like a sort of gradual return to school? Are there resources that for pacing that return? Any tips?
Yeah, there are. There's quite that's one area where there is some stuff out there. There was some stuff already out there for kids that's reasonably helpful. In the 4th book and on the online platform, the Zoe and Zach's painhacks.com, if you click on the 4th book, you can see Zach's plan of how he got back to school. And again, this is not to say that's always the case, but then there's a template for you to chat through with your health professional and your parents, and work through what will work for you. And I guess, so the evidence underpinning this is, yes, gradual makes more sense. I like to think of it like with graded exposure and pacing, it's like you're kind of sneaking up on your nervous system. So like, if 2 hours was okay, let's just do 2 hours 15 tomorrow, and like gradually build up, and we'll stay for recess, and then we'll do lunch, and like over a period of, like, we're not talking days, it's probably weeks, or maybe up to a term. It's not years either. Like, the return can happen reasonably steadily. And I think it's being a bit flexible. Like, there's going to be fluctuations early on, and people's symptoms, often they get described like feeling like they're on a roller coaster. And so you need to kind of flatten the roller coaster, and often getting back to doing what you love. So sports or hobbies or school, whatever it is, that is normally the first thing to happen before the pain experiences change. And so I'm not promising that if someone goes back to school that their pain will disappear, but commonly what happens is pain does improve, or it becomes less bothersome. And for some people, pain does go away when that happens, and they go through all these strategies. But for a lot of people, their pain is still there, but their quality of life drastically improves. And that's kind of like the minimum. That's where we definitely want to do that, at least that. And then if we can also help the pain come down, that's great. That's kind of like a bonus. But we want to focus our attention on getting back to doing those meaningful life activities.
Yeah. And it's probably tempting to, as a parent, send the child back to school thinking, I'll do English and maths and those important lessons. But am I right in thinking it's probably quite important to have some recess or lunch in there as well, a bit of social time?
Again, this would depend if the kid loves recess or lunch, right? Like, I think it's a very much a preference related thing. Like, all the studies on behavior change and what helps us as humans do things, like if someone wants to go to the gym or whatever, like money will incentivize someone, or their interest or their motivation. It needs a prompt. Lots of different things are happening. And I think parents are often so keen to just push and get things back and do the important things first. But often if we can go and think about like emotional reward systems, you see more success sooner. So it might be an extra week to get back to maths or something like that, but it's not a huge setback in the big scheme of things. When kids are missing like the equivalent of a year of high school, like, let's nip it in the bud and try and do these things sooner rather than later. But it is complex, and like, teachers aren't health professionals, and some schools don't have those health professionals around, and some pain clinics don't have school links, and lots of challenges are happening. So one encouragement would be to try and get all those health professionals and different people around you to all have access to the same information. And hopefully the internet will allow better systems soon. But it's a big challenge. Yeah.
Absolutely. The couple of studies that you mentioned towards the end there about studying how teachers deal with pain, do you have consumer sort of spots for people to get involved in those, or are they further down the track?
So the school stuff, like, there's some projects that are almost wrapping up, and then there's others that are just starting. So it's a real mixed bag there. The teacher interviews, I think there's a couple of spots left on the interviews, and it's kind of asking teachers' experiences about pain in the classroom and how they currently manage it and how they'd like to manage it, and some of those things, because what we've found is there's barriers that happen and facilitators that happen in every school system differently. Like, if you're in a big, well-resourced school, or public versus private, or rural versus city, or like, there's so many things going on. And so we're trying to capture those broader experiences. So yeah, please do reach out. I'm very, very keen to hear. And likewise, there's research with parents, and there's research with kids and with families. There's a survey coming. We just got ethics approval. So another one of my PhD students, Jen Norton, will be putting out a call on social media in the coming weeks, hopefully, about that survey. So
feel free to share it with us to get out to our families, because I feel like there'll be lots of families there interested in being involved in something like that.
That'll be great.
Got another comment more than anything, but a person here encouraging us all to make requests to our local libraries to help spread the word and increase equitable availability of these resources. That's a great idea too.
It's funny because I'm the author. Like, I obviously want this, but like, there is part of me. It's just like, I don't. If someone else writes a better book, that's great. Like, let's get it to everyone. Like, we want to make it fair. It's really challenging. Like, as a scientist, when you go to these international conferences, and it's like, in Australia, we already have access because most papers are published in English. We're already getting to it sooner, but the data shows that, I think the latest data on how long it takes for a research finding to actually change things in reality, it's about 17 years. There's a huge lag happening. And I think we're catching up. And definitely, like, in pediatric pain, what has happened in the last 5 years is really getting out there. So it's very exciting to see that, like, we're chasing our tail a little bit, getting there. But yeah, that'd be great. Like, thanks to that, whoever suggested requesting it from your library. It's free to do, and that'd be very cool.
Yeah. And just a question that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about our Teen Talk group, who are our older, sort of 13 to 20-year-old young people. What resources can you recommend for that age group? Because they're probably getting a little old for this.
So there's a few things. The ACI New South Wales Pain Bites, there's like a series of videos that teens often start, like there's like episodes and they kind of cover different topics.
We've got those up on our website for anyone interested in those.
Yeah, like you guys have lots of great resources, and there's some big websites that have that. And I think it depends what specifically you're interested in. Hayley Leake's work, like she's done probably in the teen pain research in Australia, she would have published the most stuff about this stuff, this topic. So Tonya Palomo does things in America. Anyway, if people want to ask specific questions, they can email and I can send links and papers through. Very happy to share that stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we seem to have got to the end of our Q&As, unless anybody wants to quickly type something in. Whilst we're just waiting to see if anything else comes through, could I ask everyone just to hold on for a few minutes longer after we finish? There's a quick survey that comes up for you to answer some questions about how you find our surveys and our webinars and what you might like to see in the future from us, because this is a great chance to have your say about our webinars for later this year and into next year. Somebody's asking here, will this be available to view later? Absolutely it will. We will edit out any of my mistakes, and we will get this sent out to everybody that registered, and it will also be up on our website and on our socials. So follow us on Facebook and Instagram to find the link there. Okay, I think we are good. So thank you so much, Josh. That was fantastic.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was great.
It's given everyone a lot to think about.
Oh, I'm glad.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next MSK Kids webinar in September. Take care. Bye.